Well, we're gonna have people kind of dropping in and dropping out. I think in the course of the roundtable, everyone, of course, is very busy. But I think it probably makes sense just to start right in. And I'm Jeff Haynes. I'm a professor of Japanese history, and I'm also the director of the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies and the director of our new Title VI East Asia National Resource Center. And I'll be basically playing the role of moderator. But then, of course, moderators always arrogate some substance to themselves, so I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to try and put this in some perspective. We've been talking about a roundtable like this virtually from the time of the event itself on March 11th, an event which a couple of us on the faculty actually experienced. Myself in Kyoto, Andrew Goebel in Tokyo, and I'm sure that there are others that I'm not aware of who also felt this quake. I was over 400 miles away, and it shook my hotel in Kyoto to the point that I got up out of my chair in my hotel room and made my way down to the lobby and outside of the hotel. And it tells you something, I think, about the intensity of a 9.0 earthquake. As I think everybody knows, there was an earthquake, a tsunami, and then there's an ongoing drama at Fukushima Daiichi related to their nuclear reactors, which is something that Greg Bothun is going to be talking to us about more specifically. As of 4/11, that is 1 month after the earthquake, the death toll was, the casualty estimates were at dead 13,100. But one really disturbing and quite awe-inspiring fact is that there were still at that point 14,300 people who were missing. And probably some of those people, of course, will never be found. Then, too, I think everybody probably knows that there was another earthquake yesterday. Originally, it was measured at 7.1. I think they revised it later to 6.6. And another piece of news yesterday, of course, was that using the International Atomic Energy Agency's standards, the risk factor at the nuclear plant was raised from 5 to 7. And just to put that in some perspective, I went myself to see what exactly that meant. It was raised from the level of an anomaly to the level of a major accident. And by going to 7, it put it at the same level as Chernobyl in 1986. So we're talking about something that's really quite a disastrous set of events and a real tragedy in a variety of different ways in Tohoku. I don't really want to preempt what the distinguished speakers on the panel have to say, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. And I thought what I might do instead is to read a letter that I translated from my mentor in Japan, Miyamoto Kenichi, who is an environmental economist, someone who's been moved very deeply for that professional reason, but also for personal reasons by this earthquake and tsunami and obviously ongoing drama at Fukushima. He wrote this letter to me on the 23rd of March of this year, and sent it along with some clippings in a couple of magazines that gave me a kind of more concrete notion of how the aftermath of the earthquake was being covered. And I'm just going to read it to you really quickly. The Great Eastern Japan Earthquake, the Higashi Nihon Daishinsai, is the largest natural disaster in the history of modern Japan. At 9.0 in magnitude, the earthquake is the 4th largest ever measured. Taking into account the tsunami and the collapse of the Fukushima nuclear plant, the event has wrought untold damage. More than the earthquake, it is the tsunami that created the greatest damage. The earthquake caused the collapse of buildings and other structures, but the tsunami has wiped out entire neighborhoods. Because people were swallowed up in the wave of the tsunami, beyond the 9,000 confirmed dead, and this is March 23rd, over 13,000 people remain missing. Both of those numbers obviously are now higher. Japan has experienced tsunami damage from ancient times, but the damages this time have been so great that we're using the English word tsunami to talk about them as a way of conveying the utterly extraordinary magnitude of the event, which is completely foreign to our experience, present and historical. The people of the Sanriku area of Tohoku, who have frequently experienced loss from natural disasters throughout their history, have long taken earthquake and tsunami disaster mitigation seriously. The little port town of Kamaishi built the world's foremost seawall, attracting students of such things from around the world, and they thought that they had erected the perfect anti-tsunami defense. Nevertheless, that seawall could not protect them from this earthquake and tsunami, which wrought massive damage. Beyond this, the seaward fringe of Fukushima Prefecture, which has the greatest concentration of nuclear plants in Japan, such a concentration indeed that it has been called Japan's nuclear Ginza. There too, there is an ongoing disaster. Not only were these nuclear reactors rocked by the earthquake, they were swamped by the tsunami that followed, and then thus experienced great damage. The suicidal efforts of electric company employees, firemen, and self-defense forces are beginning to ward off a complete breach, but a great deal of radioactivity continues to be released. As of today, March 23rd, it is not clear whether the damage can be averted. How will the 200,000 people living in refugee shelters rebuild their lives? When will restrictions on electricity be lifted? When will the next great earthquake take place? These are the worries that preoccupy us. After all, it will probably take 5 to 6 years to achieve reconstruction, but what then? In this earthquake, the 20 million people who live in the greater Tokyo region largely escaped a direct impact. But immediately after the earthquake, when the trains all stopped, and today, as Tokyo experiences rolling blackouts, the residents continue to experience distress in their daily lives. This demonstrates just how vulnerable to a natural disaster such overcrowded metropolises truly are. We appreciate the expressions of sympathy, as well as the generous donations from overseas. Japanese are a perseverant people, selfless and with a strong collective spirit. Even amidst disaster, there's been no rioting or crime, and it's probably fine for us to be proud of that fact. But such perseverance can't last forever. It is important for us and for our leaders to move quickly to help return us to normalcy. And I also have a letter to read before I introduce the panel from the Consul General of Japan, Okabe Takamichi, who sent this to me this afternoon. To CAPS and to the Earthquake Roundtable participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that I could not be there in person with you today, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your generous outpouring of support for the people of Japan during this time of hardship. There is much suffering in Japan right now, and we worry daily for our citizens and our loved ones back home. We are confident that with the help and friendship of good people like you, we will persevere and recover even stronger than before. Strengthened by your support and all of your warm feelings, we will move forward with determination and great hope. Thank you all very much. So, with that, thank you to the participants in the roundtable, and obviously also to the audience here today. I just want to briefly introduce our panelists and then leave it to them to talk perhaps 10 minutes each. There are various different areas of expertise related to the earthquake. One of our panelists isn't here yet, and I hope that he will be here soon. This is Ray Weldon from Geological Sciences. At the end of the table is Karen Kelsky, who's a PhD in anthropology, Japanese anthropologist, who's now working in our teaching effectiveness program. Next to her is Mark Unno, who is a professor of religious studies, in particular focused on Japan. Next to Mark is Lisa Hoashi, who is a representative from Mercy Corps, relief organization, which is based up in Portland. And then finally, from the Department of Physics, we have Greg Bothun, who is going to talk to us a little bit about Fukushima Daiichi incident in particular. In terms of the order, we had hoped that Ray would be speaking first, but I think Greg will say some things about the earthquake and the tsunami itself.
Yeah, okay, I'll put on a geologist hat for a while. Change this cable, just do some brief things here. The first thing is that this is a not unexpected event. It's just an unlucky event that it occurred now. Within the century time frame, one expects these kinds of events to occur. Okay. Japan is highly prone. It's the most statistically likely place on the planet to have the strongest earthquakes. History verifies that. Our understanding of current tectonic movement would predict that, because Japan sits at an unfortunate confluence between the four largest plates on the planet that we know of: the Pacific Plate, the Philippine Plate, Eurasian Plate, and North American Plate. And you have tremendous amounts of stored strain energy there, and documented releases of this strain on timescales of 300 years or so. The last such quake that occurred in a similar environment occurred on our coast, which I'll show you momentarily, in the year 1700. That date's been identified through analysis of Japanese fishing village diaries and other documents. That's about 3 or 4 years ago. We know it happened on January 17th in the year 1700. So this kind of magnitude 9 earthquake is not unexpected in this region, and you'd expect a few every 1,000 years. So it's just bad timing. Could have happened 50 years from now, and things might be worse, on the other hand, if the power and population density of Japan increases. So you just never know about these kinds of things. Just a bit of nerd science here. These actual measurements of very powerful earthquakes are very hard to calibrate very well. So we don't know in relation historically where this lies, but there was an earthquake in Chile 2 years ago, which was likely the largest earthquake ever recorded by seismometers. Now, in the year 1700, we had this situation on the Oregon coast, which sent devastating tsunami headed to Japan. It's almost exactly the same geophysics at work, large plates, and so in Oregon, we are due for a very large event. These plates don't talk to each other immediately. This thing can't trigger what happens 5,000 miles away immediately. It can trigger what might happen 5,000 miles away in 20 or 25 years. Now, as a result of all of this, there's now this somewhat panic as well. How many nuclear power plants, in fact, are at risk? And there is the... Oh, this is actually good news. It's not bad news. There's the U.S. map of 104 nuclear plants. Those are the things in red. And the black dots are where all the earthquake zones are. We don't have any earthquakes in the east or Midwest except for this peculiar area around New Madrid, Missouri. But most of these power plants are not at all prone to earthquake risks. The only ones that are the ones really in California, the Diablo Canyon and the San Onofre plant. And to some extent, Hanford up here, but it's got so many other problems. Earthquakes will be the least of its problems. So for the U.S., we're relatively okay. If Indonesia wants to ramp up its energy economy with nuclear power plants, they'll be at risk. India is already doing this, and in very risky places as well. I think the thing that happened in Japan will happen again in your lifetime somewhere in a populated area involving an earthquake compromising the structure of a nuclear reactor, and then I'll have more comments about that later. But I'll just leave it at this to say that this kind of magnitude earthquake is expected on centuries time scale. It happened in an unfortunate time. The tsunamis propagate on the ocean. That's a 24-hour propagation cycle. The damage that was done in the Sendai area is an artifact of the local topography of the ocean basin. The big earthquake that happened in Java, the thing that happened December 26, 2005, 6, 4, something, geologists have discovered a new feature now. We usually think that tsunamis are generated because there's a drop. Well, that earthquake showed that actual 750-mile-long piece of the plate, 750 miles long, uplifted by 40 feet. So we've just learned something about tsunamis. They can be extraordinarily damaging. In this particular case, that didn't happen, but what did happen is the local topography of the ocean basin essentially acted as a focusing mechanism, taking this big, gigantic wave and shoved it through a tunnel targeted right at Sendai. That's why it went so far inland and did so much damage. So the damage done by tsunamis is really very dependent on exactly where the quake hits. If the quake had been 50 miles south, there would have been much, much less damage because the topography of the ocean basin is different there. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it. Karen Kelsky is our next speaker, and she's going to be talking about the human disaster related to.
Yeah, can you plug that back in? Thank you.
So, sorry.
That's my presentation. And then we have to, yeah, thank you. Can you find it? Maybe it's right there.
There it is. There you go.
Okay. Thanks. All right. So I'm going to use this. I hope it works. Jeff, when we were talking about doing this roundtable, asked me to talk about the human side, the cultural side of the disaster and the context, because I'm a cultural anthropologist. I immediately panicked because I felt that there is no way to talk about the human side of this disaster. It's simply too enormous. It's indescribable. And I wondered for a long time what in the world I could possibly say from an anthropological perspective, about this disaster. But I began to, but he also asked me to talk about the demographic background, to kind of explain why there was such a large number of elderly among the victims to begin with. And so that is something that has been quite a bit studied by anthropologists. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm just going to actually show some photographs from the evacuation centers, and really with a theme much more of the endurance, the perseverance of Japanese cultural values in the evacuation centers, and some of the interesting things that I see from those photographs from an anthropological perspective. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I have a great fondness for the Tohoku region to such an extent because it's really a backwater. As many people, that might be an unfortunate term actually to use, but in any case, it's really the hinterlands of Japan. And so I actually, in the 30 years that I've been traveling to Japan, one summer I took a whole trip to the Tohoku and Fukushima region entirely to see these kinds of houses, which are called kayabukiyane, which are thatch roof houses. They're very, very difficult to find. It's really a dying tradition. Very, very few craftsmen know how to make these roofs, which are thatch roofs. So the thatch is bundled that thick, and at one time in Japan, hundreds of years ago, this was a very, very common form of household. So I wanted to show you that this is, in some ways, some of the context, that the Tohoku region was in some ways a very place where traditions endured. But those traditions really came at a great cost. It was great for tourists who wanted to see kayabukiyane, but it was not great for young people who were looking for jobs. The young people have gone from regions like Tohoku in the trend toward urbanization that has affected all of Japan in the post-war years, a massive, massive outflux of young people from rural regions to the cities. I wanted to be sure that you understood, which I'm sure that you do from the images, that Sendai, the city of Sendai, is a major, large city and not a place of quaint, old farmhouse, kayabukiyane farmhouses. But nevertheless, the region as a whole has suffered from a massive depopulation, with kasoka, and that is exacerbated by the aging of Japan's population. So many of you are familiar with this phenomenon of the aging population of Japan. But these four graphs show 1930, 1950, 2000, and projected for 2050, the demographic age breakdown of the country of Japan by age, with the lowest part being, of course, children, and the highest level being the elderly. And as you can see, in 1930, it was a situation with a very large number of children, very small number of elderly, and that is now, by 2050, on its way to being reversed. So the population of Japan is rapidly decreasing in age. It is not replicating itself, so it is a shrinking population, and it's a drastically, rapidly aging population. So that, in addition, works hand in hand with the urbanization to mean that the young people there are end up in the cities, and the elderly are very extensively concentrated in places like Tohoku. And so that is a large part of why, the reason that so many elderly people were in the areas of Tohoku, the farming villages of Tohoku, that ended up becoming the victims. Not simply because they were elderly and couldn't get away, but because they were overrepresented in the first place. The interesting thing, Greg, right? Greg said if it had happened 50 years from now, maybe the damage would be worse because the population would have increased. In a sense, in Tohoku's case, in 50 years, perhaps the damage would have been less, because chances are the population will be less, although that's not necessarily an improvement. Okay. But one thing that I do know from having done quite a bit of research and traveling in Japan's rural areas is that although there is a decline, there is great determination. Japanese people who persist in living in the countryside are have great perseverance and determination, and they don't give up easily, including the elderly people. So that is a bit of the context, demographic context of the Tohoku region. Now I wanted to share with you some photos that I found really interesting about the post-disaster events that emerged as we began to see images from the evacuation centers. People, as we began to understand what was happening, reporter after reporter in the New York Times and places like that commented on the tremendous orderliness of Japanese life in the evacuation centers. Everybody has commented there has not been looting, there has not been theft, there has not been rioting, there has not been really panicking, and that is true. That is true. I have read that I began to disbelieve the American news. And so I stopped watching it, and I started streaming the Japanese news on the internet to see if there was a different story being told, and there wasn't. It was very, very consistent. It was really, I was struck as an anthropologist by what I have to call the durability of Japanese cultural values, even in a time of intense crisis. And foremost among them, a real love for orderliness. So some of these photos show some of the things that were accomplished with astounding speed in evacuation centers, and these were not things that were, the roads were absolutely impassable for weeks at a time. So much of what was happening here was organized by the survivors themselves. The people did not come in and help the survivors right away. They did eventually. But at first, it was the survivors themselves who organized themselves. I was amazed at the stories of people instantly organizing themselves into food brigades, kitchen brigades, and taking whatever food they could find that was salvageable, a lot of canned goods generally, and making and setting up kitchen setups to make food for the survivors. Those lights up there are squid fishing lights that they salvaged and hung up to use to light this dining room. As you can see in this picture, this photo shows people, really preserving a kind of a formal eating situation, and really making an effort to preserve foodways and food cultures, which is, as those of you who are familiar with Japan know, is a very, very foundational value in Japan to the sharing of food, the preparing of food, and the eating of food. Other things that were accomplished by survivors without actually the assistance of outsiders to begin was the search for survivors. And the other thing that I was struck by when you look at the photos from the evacuation center was the use of the very, very scarce resources that there were. I don't know what those blue things are, but you see a lot of them, to set up screens for privacy, so that such privacy as you could accomplish, and establishing a boundary between your space and your neighbor's space, your uchi and your soto, your inside and your outside, critical cultural value in Japan, could be accomplished by virtue of a blue screen. Now, there is the Crown Prince and Princess who visited the evacuation center and paid a visit and are being bowed to. Also created within about 2 weeks of the incident was a bath. Yeah, volunteer firemen who were also survivors. They were not rescuers. They were just volunteer fire brigade. Got a tarp and a can and some kind of heat source and created a bath. People, again, with the observation that people did what they could without exploiting the situation. This man right here had a gas station. Although he had lost his entire family, he opened his gas station and provided the gas that he could while he still had some to help the other people. The store owners, would they salvage the clothing that they could, and they washed it. They washed the clothing, and then they put them out, and they sold them for 10% of the normal price, so that everybody who possibly could get a change of clothes. You might notice that, as far as I can tell, I can't see the whole thing, but I believe that it says the things in this basket are probably free. The little character's kind of missing there, but so they were putting as much out for free as they could. In the evacuation centers, it's interesting. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this building actually is, but the futons are neatly folded, and sleeping and living areas are clearly distinguished. In this photograph, which was in the New York Times, it's very important. This man has nothing more than the space of a newspaper, but he wears his slippers. He does not wear his slippers in the space of his newspaper. He has left the slippers outside. So your life may be reduced to, 4 square feet, but it is still your uchi, your 4 square feet of your home. Okay, so that's my main point I wanted to make about the evacuation centers. Real quickly, of course, this was a national level event. It hit Tokyo. This is actually Shibuya. Yeah. Without electricity, basically without electricity. Rolling blackouts hit daily for many, many weeks. I'm not sure if they're still going on. I think they are, aren't they? Yeah. And I'm going to go step back from that for a second. No, I think I'll just go ahead. My friends in Japan told me that they that it was, again, it wasn't panicking, it wasn't, there wasn't the kind of resistance or conflict that you might expect. A friend of mine told me, yes, it's hard to live without electricity, but actually now my kids and I, we all sit in one room together under the kotatsu with just a lamp or a candle, and we actually talk to each other instead of all being locked, isolated in our separate rooms. And it's actually been kind of nice. Didn't expect to hear that. So now, however, this thing has dragged on. And just yesterday, I got the first report that I saw of an actual protest. A protest in Tokyo by people who were protesting, of course, against the nuclear power plants and the nuclear industry. This is not a new protest. These folks, I actually did a study of them. They've been around for many, many years, since the 1950s. They have been opposed to Japanese reliance on nuclear energy since the 1950s. And they are probably right now, for the first time, getting a hearing from the mainstream society in Japan. I found that to be kind of a heart-wrenching photograph. that they have a sign in English apologizing to the world for releasing radiation. So Japan, as the letter that Jeff read indicated, is a society of tremendous resilience, tremendous perseverance and determination, and so I'm going to end on a hopeful note. There was a lot of talk in the Japanese news that I was hearing of the cherry blossoms, and they did bloom. A few of them did bloom in Sendai, and so I'm going to end on that image.
Mark. It's a perfect segue to the brief thoughts that I'd like to share based on a story that I'd like to read from. So many people have heard of the Fukushima 50, the 50 workers who remained within the plant to try to stop the crisis in the nuclear reactors from increasing. And this was reported on April 5th. As Japan continues to grapple with catastrophic radiation leaks at the quake-damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex, the plant's remaining workers, the plant's remaining workers have shown heroic dedication in the face of a task that amounts to a likely suicide mission. The global audience following the Japanese nuclear drama has learned a little about these selfless heroes, but some of the most basic questions about them, who they are and what has motivated them to make the ultimate sacrifice, have gone unanswered. Now, however, the Agence France Presse reporter, Kimi de Freitas, has published an interview with one of the Fukushima workers. Hiroyuki Kono, 44-year-old plant worker who's been employed in the nuclear industry since he was a teenager, promptly answered the emergency call issued by TEPCO, a subcontract. Shortly after last March's devastating earthquake and tsunami produced a power outage at the facility, TEPCO sent out an all-hands appeal via email. Attention, we would like you to come to work at the plant. Can you? De Freitas reports the email read, Kono, who has worked at the Fukushima facility for the past decade, said he knew what the implications of heeding the call would be. To be honest, no one wants to go, Kono said. Radiation levels at the plant are unbelievably high compared with normal conditions. I know that when I go this time, I will return with a body no longer capable of work at a nuclear plant. Kono said that as a single man with no children, he felt obligated to answer the call and join the team that the media has dubbed the Fukushima 50. Better that he face the risk, he explained, so as to spare his colleagues who have dependents counting on them. Besides, he added, the workers in the plant are his brothers and sisters, and he feels an allegiance to them. There's a Japanese expression, we eat from the same rice bowl. These are friends I shared pain and laughter with, and that's why I'm going. Other workers among the Fukushima 50 have apparently discussed the dire prospects ahead fairly openly, as the unidentified mother of a 32-year-old plant worker explained in a tearful phone interview with Fox News. My son and his colleagues have discussed it at length, and they have committed themselves to die if necessary to save the country. So it was, as I can't help but letting show, it was very powerful to read this. And as a scholar of religious studies, I thought about the cultural values that you mentioned, which are certainly informed by the religious traditions in Japan, such as Buddhism and Confucianism, and tribal beliefs and practices surrounding the gods and goddesses, the kami, all of which emphasize community and solidarity and interdependence and importance of family, both in the literal sense of one's own biological family, but the family of the village, the community, and in the modern context, the company, the corporation as a family that one belongs to and that one makes a lifelong commitment to. So, there's not a whole lot of analysis I want to do here, except just to say that we live in arguably a very difficult point in human history in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008 and all of the interlocking puzzles that involve the ecology, environment, industry, and so on and so forth. And currently we have great conflicts breaking out all over the world in the Middle East. We have riots in the European Union, and there are problems everywhere. But not only this person's own response to his local situation, but the overwhelmingly helpful response of everyone around the world I think shows the human capacity and impulse to reach out, to help, and to work together. So the human species is very unique. No other species in the history of the planet has dominated the environment and the resources on the planet as our species has done. And at certain points, I think it's not difficult to find various literature that suggests that we have control of nature. But I think this event clearly shows that that's not the case. And that the real power of our species is not technological. But human. Life is very fragile, and in that fragility, there can be great spirit, as expressed by this man and those who have extended their support to the many people who are suffering. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Maybe return to Greg again.
Okay. I don't have any general structure here because this nuclear plants they're complicated. There's lots of dimensions. I can tell you a little bit about why a Chernobyl-like event did not occur, will not occur in these cases. Let me speak first to the energy economy of Japan and why there are so many nuclear power plants and what the overall plan was in Japan. Japan's the fourth largest energy economy in the world, but per capita energy use in Japan is about half that in the U.S., so we still lead that. There are 54 reactors in Japan compared to 104 reactors in the U.S., so the reactor density, Japan's not big. Japan has by far the largest power density of any country in the world. If you just take their power capacity, 280 gigawatts, it's a meaningless number, divided by the number of square miles, they'll come out a factor of 10 larger than any country in the world. So they are fundamentally at risk with all sources of electricity generation given their post-World War growth because they live in a seismically and volcanically unstable part of the world. So this could have disrupted massive amounts of natural gas. You could have had, especially if it happened in Tokyo, you would have huge amounts of explosions. You could have the same problems at coal mines. There's just overdensity. Overdensity will lead to disaster. The long-term goal of Japan was to reduce their carbon footprint via increasing nuclear energy rather than investing in renewables, in which Japan has a fair amount of resources. They've not chosen to do that for whatever reason. The plan was to go from 25% of their electricity generation portfolio now to 40% by the year 2050. a move that any other country in the world would regard as unwise. And also kind of unsupportable because we're actually running out of raw nuclear fuel. So Japan was totally committed to the nuclear route as of the mid-'80s. And so this is sort of a disaster in waiting. If you just put too many nuclear power plants to too many hazards, accidents are going to happen. In the same way that if you try and drill too deep into the ground for oil too fast with too many rigs, accidents are going to happen. It's the same root cause for the Deep Horizon thing that happened about a year ago that most people have forgotten about. To give you a comparison of the regional impact of this, this power plant combined to equal the power output of all the 4 dams on the lower Columbia River. And while the combined facility is only a 2% loss for Japan, Japan, as is the U.S., doesn't have any buffer. If 2% of our grid would go down, we would have rolling blackouts until that 2% were repaired. This is what happened in California in 2000, until about a year later they brought a bunch of natural gas facilities online. There's 2 big differences between the U.S. and Japan. This is my little take on a cultural component, which shows how much more adept the Japanese are at solving problems than we are. The biggest one is communication. Every day, I'm teaching an energy class this term, and we're actually examining this, because every day there's a website, and I have a friend of mine who lives in Tokyo, sends it to me. It's all in Japanese. I don't understand any of it, but it's a graph. I get that part. Where any citizen in Tokyo can log into this website and find out what the current state of power is in the country. Are we 92%, 91%? What the schedule for rolling blackouts are. So everybody knows it's coming, and so you can plan and you can actually deal with this. That would never happen in the U.S. We just have blame wars going on. We don't actually have solutions. But regionally, in the Sendai region, this power loss is catastrophic. And replacement power at this level will not be available for 5 or 6 years if Japan tries to replace it with conventional sources of power. This is actually a paradoxical opportunity for Japan to shift its mind about its nuclear trajectory. That'll be interesting to see if this plays out. This happened in the United States. Many of you in the audience are old enough to remember simultaneously a real live event called 3 Mile Island, which occurred in 1979, coupled with the release of a movie called The China Syndrome. Those 2 things essentially stopped the nuclear industry growth in the United States because we're basically very reactionary. It's unclear if the Japan long-term energy goal will be interrupted by this catastrophic event, or if it will be regarded ultimately as a risk, the cost of doing business by going this way. That's unclear. The facility itself started construction in 1974. The last powerhouse was built in the late 80s. It was built relatively high safety standards with respect to the control of a meltdown. This is what distinguishes it from Chernobyl. I don't want to make a long technical deal here, but basically there are these things that are called control rods. They're in every science fiction movie. You got guys in white coats moving control rods, right? You can design proper control rods, or you can design cheap control rods. Chernobyl chose the cheap path. They chose a control rod mechanism whose exact procedure for implementation was not understood by the crew that was implementing it. The worst possible situation. It's like when you're flying a plane, right? An instruction book says pull up when you really should actually pull down so you keep flying. Same thing happened in Chernobyl. So the Japanese plants were not designed this way. They were designed with very good control rods, with a lot of training. The workers there are highly, highly trained. And that's why they stayed there. They know what to do. Nobody else knows what to do. The worst case disaster is 6 simultaneous meltdowns. Anybody would avoid that. Japanese management did something that wouldn't have happened in America. Their initial decision was these plants are done. We have to sacrifice them. There was no, oh, let's have a strategy to figure out how we can repair them. That wasn't part of the process. In the U.S., we would probably worry about, well, we need this power, we have to get it back online. Let's fix the thing. But their decision was made when the seawater, once you open the thing up to seawater, you're done. Your plant cannot come back to life after that. So because this process of controlling the amount of neutrons that are being released, that's what the control rods do, they absorb them, has to be done in a precise and systematic way. There's only a handful of people that can do it. So in that case, the choice is kind of clear. We're trying to avoid the worst possible outcome. Now, the randomness of this, there's 2 points of randomness in here, which nobody can really deal with. It's very unclear how effective flooding with seawater can ultimately be. It depends upon which the rate that you can flood it with, and that's hard to know. Plus, a byproduct of all nuclear reactions is a buildup of hydrogen gas, which, when the plant's running normally, is properly vented and controlled for. When the plant is shut down or dysfunctional, the control mechanisms that control the release and rate at which hydrogen is generated is random. The initial explosions occur as a result of these hydrogen sinks. That's completely decoupled from what the reactor does, but can lead to this chain. So to avoid 6 Chernobyl events, which would have been catastrophic out to a radius of about 80 kilometers in Japan, and since the population density is huge, the 50 are essentially protecting, millions from that potential event. Now, that potential event is not going to happen because if it were going to happen, it would have happened by now, for sure, because of the effectiveness of the control rod structure. So now there are still these large discharges into the ocean, which dissipate very, very fast. So it will be a local disaster, but about 20 kilometers away, it won't be. But these rates of seawater mixing and discharge are kind of fluctuating and random, which is why the situation can go from level 5 to level 7 very fast. But everything that can be done has been done, and now if there is a catastrophe, which is unlikely, it'll just be beyond our ability to do anything about it. But the plants were well engineered. The only real, and this is hard to, it's easy to criticize what happens in the past. We do it all the time. It's hard to realize that when you got devastated by a war, World War II changed everything for everybody. You got devastated by a war, you want to rebuild your economy. The only way you can rebuild your economy is to get enough energy online as fast as possible. It's the same reason we built the atom bomb. The only way to win a big war is that somebody has to produce a weapon that everyone's afraid of as fast as possible, which is why the Hanford reactors are worstly designed in the world, because nobody cared about whether it was safe. They just wanted to build the device as fast as possible. And, the whole world is caught up in this. China's caught up in this now. The U.S. certainly was caught up in this. And so Japan wanted to rebuild their economy as fast as possible. You get the most energy you can that you can afford online as fast as possible. Those kinds of economic conditions have changed, priorities have changed, so you won't see that in the future. But that's the reason that Japan built 54 nuclear power plants in about 30 years. Because that was the quickest way they could get as much electricity as possible. So just to sum up here, because the plants were well designed, because the workers were well trained, disaster was avoided, and I think it's very unlikely that anything catastrophic is going to happen.
Thanks, Greg, and this is why we have physicists here. For some credibility. I want to just say a couple of words about Mercy Corps before Lisa begins to talk, since she's the one who's driven down here, taking her own time and energy to add to this discussion. I think I mentioned at the beginning that Mercy Corps is a disaster relief organization based up in Portland. They are now on the ground in Japan, working with a variety of different other organizations in a variety of different ways to provide targeted disaster relief. One of the things that was particularly impressive to me is a program they have called Comfort for Kids, which recognizes that children are traumatized by these events and that they need to be able to express themselves and to engage what's happening to them. So hopefully Lisa will talk a little bit about that, and also about Mercy Corps' activities in Japan. In Finally, I just want to say that I think all of you know, hopefully all of you know, that there are two interconnected events here. One is this roundtable. The second is a benefit concert, koto concert, by an internationally renowned koto artist, Mitsuki Dazai, who is somewhere either in the audience or there she is back there, who is graciously volunteered her time and her artistry for everyone. The proceeds from that benefit concert will go to Mercy Corps, so it's all kind of tied together. So, Lisa.
Thank you, Jeff. Just test this. Thanks also for my panelists for their very informative, and also I really appreciate the human connection that both Mark and Karen have spoken about. Certainly because Mercy Corps' work is very much human-driven, and it's because of people like you who care and want to show your support during times of emergencies that Mercy Corps can do its work around the world. So we're really out there on your behalf doing programs like the ones we're doing in Japan. So just very briefly about Mercy Corps, we work in after crises like the Japan earthquake and tsunami. We provide immediate emergency relief to communities, and then we stay on and we'll help them rebuild in various ways. And we work in 36 different countries around the world, and generally they're among the poorest and toughest places in the world. Places like Sudan or Somalia, Afghanistan or Iraq. So we've already gone over the actual event, which was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake, and as we said before, also it was really the tsunami that did the most damage in the places where that were most affected. So that was on the northeastern coast of Japan, and that's where Mercy Corps is working with our partner organization, Peace Winds, which is a Japanese-based organization. So we're working in 4 different cities in the northeastern coast of Japan. So the initial question for people who know Mercy Corps' work and the type of places that we work in are generally among the poorest in the world. They would say, why would you respond in a country as wealthy and as prepared as Japan is? And I think, as it's also already been reviewed here, the magnitude of this disaster was so great and so unexpected. Japan was hit with a triple blow of an earthquake, a tsunami, and now the nuclear crisis, which is ongoing. And it's also very important to remember that the aftershocks of the earthquake, as Jeff mentioned, are also very much ongoing. And so really it's been a crisis that Japan has been enduring now for over a month. Also, it's just also good to bring in light also to a developed country like the United States. We had a lot of difficulty after Hurricane Katrina, and so there are moments where certainly even a very well-prepared country would have difficulty responding to the needs of the people. These are just a few images from the tsunami-affected areas. In particular, the wintry conditions in the northeastern coast made it very difficult for people. You have to remember that people who were fleeing the tsunami really just left their homes with the clothing on their backs. And so they were left extremely vulnerable to the outside conditions. Very shortly after the evacuation, temporary evacuation shelters were created out of schools, out of shopping centers, any buildings that people could organize at, and it was very much led by the survivors. All of our emergency teams have remarked upon the amazing capacity of people to self-organize and begin taking care of their own needs. Just to speak a little bit about our partner, Mercy Corps has actually worked with the organization Peace Winds, which is a relief organization based out of Japan. We've partnered with them over the last decade and worked with them in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also they came and helped us after Hurricane Katrina here in the United States. And we have a really great partnership with them. They have staff on the ground as well as a bunch of volunteers, and Mercy Corps has also sent staff and is providing them with funding and also really helping them develop some further programs. They primarily specialize in the emergency relief, and we're going to really build their capacity in terms of being able to do a little bit longer term recovery type programs. So this actually here in the blue coat is Randy Martin, who's the head of our Global Emergency Operations team, and he's visiting a tsunami area. This is a typical evacuation center, as we already saw a few images of. This is the Kesennuma Junior High School, where Mercy Corps and Peace Winds have been delivering relief supplies. We've been primarily really helping out with just people dealing with the cold, so making sure that people have new sets of clothing and blankets and other types of bedding, and also kerosene stoves, because many of the shelters didn't have heat, and they have been having very spotty electricity. And fuel has also been in short supply in this area. So much of the northeastern coast was cut off from supplies of fuel and other types of goods, and those are beginning to be brought up now. But in the very early days, it was very difficult to send things both by air or by truck up to these areas, and those are starting to improve now as we get a little bit further away from the crisis. But it is still very difficult for people to find everything that they need in terms of food. A great concern was certainly for the people's nutrition. Now, 3 or 4 weeks after, or longer after the tsunami, people have been, getting by very well and, helping each other out, but they've been getting by on a bowl of rice and some tea, and so it's very important to try and address all of their needs at this point. So just making sure that they have access to basics, and also Mercy Corps now is, and Peace Winds, they've recently built a bath for one of the evacuation centers so that people can be able to bathe on a regular basis. After the tsunami, we also immediately tried to connect people by bringing up satellite phones to the area and setting up little call centers so people could get in touch with their family members. So in Japan, the government and the national National Guard of Japan have been very good at responding to the disaster and proven to be very capable and very quick in their response. But there are a few gaps, of course, in what they're able to provide. And so really, as opposed to some other places where Mercy Corps might respond, where we would really take the lead on certain activities, we're really trying to find the spaces and the gaps in needs that we see on the ground. And one of those is with the sort of emotional recovery, not only for children, but also for the elderly. And you find after a disaster like this that people are extremely affected, and it's hard to go on and to be strong for so long to start the rebuilding process if you're not able to address some of those needs. I actually forgot to mention that I've been working as Mercy Corps' Public Information Officer for our Haiti response. So for the last year, I've been traveling to Haiti and have been supporting our team there. And so I've seen firsthand how difficult it is for people to rebuild their lives after they've lost so much, and certainly the emotional effects on people. So our Comfort for Kids program is a program that we do right after earthquakes of this size and major disasters, and we did it also after the Haiti earthquake. And basically what we do is we go out to the communities and we'll train teachers or people who work with children in how to address kids' emotional needs. You'll find that kids have an elevated level of anxiety, or that they're having difficulty handling with their grief, or just the change in their routine that a disaster might cause is upsetting them, and that you might see them acting out. They might have trouble sleeping, or they might be acting, a parent might think that they're being bad, but really they need a little bit extra attention. And so these are the really basic things that we teach people about how to spend some extra time with kids or how to talk to them. We also have to always adopt this program for the cultural context that's going into. So not only are we translating, supplemental materials of resource books, but we also have to look at the way that Japan, the culture and specific culture for the northeastern coast of Japan, to sort of test the reception and make sure that it's culturally sensitive. And so currently we're seeing that there is maybe some resistance for people to talk about mental health issues in Japan. And actually that was something that I saw happen in Haiti as well, where people really, I'm not saying this is what happened in Japan specifically, but the belief, for example, in Haiti was that only crazy people need to go talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and that they're the only ones with mental health issues. But over time, people saw such a wide population affected by the grief and anxiety of a disaster of this scope that there was more acceptance, and they started to see how that could be helpful for them. And I could certainly see that happening in Japan as well. So right now, Mercy Corps and Peace Winds are adopting the materials, and we're beginning to do outreach in the communities to see who might be interested in it. And for now, just setting up some child-friendly spaces and to play with kids and to spend time with them. So we can slowly introduce this type of therapy and methodology into the communities. And we're also adopting special elements of it for the elderly as well, as so much of the population in this area are elderly. And then the other really big focus of what we'll do to help Japan recover in the short term and over the long term will be to help with the local economy to recover. Also very specific to this area is that the industries that have remained there are, as it was mentioned, many of the young people have left these areas, and so they're very traditional industries, fishing industries. And one of our concerns that our team has is that people aren't going to want to change jobs at this point. So we'll really have to do some thinking about how to help people restart what they've done all their lives. And so some of the ways that we might do this is to give out loans, so people who are working in the fishing industry can get their businesses restarted again. That will be one way. And then in the shorter term, we'll be handing out cash vouchers to people, possibly on little debit cards, to help families who are moving from the evacuation centers to the government's temporary housing. So we'll give out, we're not sure exactly how much, but maybe like $300, so that people can get some household supplies, some basics to start up their new household in their homes. So it's really, Mercy Corps is really looking in those ways just to how to quickly infuse some cash, get it into the family's hands who need it most. And, in the areas where the government isn't able to do so. And by doing that, helping sort of jumpstart some of the local businesses. This man is a local, he actually owns a 7-Eleven in one of the cities where we're working, and he was just describing sort of where he's at right now. Because of the power outages, many of the businesses aren't able to stay open very long, but he's been keeping his shop open around 2 or 3 hours a day, and with whatever stock he's able to get from Tokyo, he has out on his shelves and people can come buy it. And he's very optimistic about what he'll be able to do next, but he doesn't have insurance, as is the case with many small business owners, and so he's not really sure how he's going to get the money to restart his business. So he would be one of the business owners that we would try to help in this situation. Lastly, I just want to say very quickly, due to my experience in Haiti, I just want to comment on the importance of disaster preparedness. And in this way, Japan certainly did excel. It was extremely well prepared, not only at the nuclear plants, but just in this area in general. They had tsunami warnings. People knew what to do in the case of an earthquake, and so many lives were saved already due to that. In Haiti, they lost 230,000 people, and in Japan, it was. By contrast, it's only a fraction of that. And so, just by having that preparedness, people were able to survive that due to building codes. The fact that in Tokyo the buildings just swayed and they didn't fall, that's really remarkable. And so it is a great tribute to the Japanese people, how well prepared that they have been and how well they've coped in this situation. And we're there to help them as they move forward.
Thanks, Lisa. I just want to say a couple of things before we open this to questions. One has to do with the kind of emotional impact of this. There's been a lot of talk about the perseverance and the resilience of the Japanese people. I was just reading yesterday a clinical psychologist talking about how serious the emotional dimension of this really is. This is something that Lisa just brought up. One quote from a clinical psychologist who's working in these little towns along the coast. He says, when you ask people in the Northeast, are you okay? They always say yes, but they're not okay. They're breathing. Then the last thing I wanted to say, just to kind of put this in a little bit of context, when things go as smoothly as this, you kind of forget that they actually take organization. And I think one of the nice things that's happened here is a collaboration between the museum and the Center for Asian Pacific Studies, and there are lots of people I think to be thanked in both organizations. So I won't go into all of those different people, but to thank everyone who is here, and then finally to remind people that there is a table over there being manned by Christina, and this is a place where, if you're so inclined, you can make a donation to Mercy Corps for this Japan disaster relief effort. So with that, let me just open it up to questions or comments that people might have.
I got just one thing, because it might be in the questions, just a little preamble about earthquake-proof buildings and things like this. Any quake larger than 9, we can't not deal with. It generates too much energy. There's no earthquake preparedness for that event whatsoever. What happened in Haiti was not only lack of building codes, but there's a peculiar thing that can happen when you shake the ground at the right frequency. It can turn to liquid. When that happens, your building codes go out the window because you're in liquid. The whole Caribbean area is prone to that kind of liquefaction, and that's really what the thing that was a devastating thing in Haiti, despite the fact there's only a magnitude 7.3 quake there. Japan is not prone to liquefaction. We are.
One more thing related to the magnitude, I think probably for everyone, and myself included, the whole concept of what is a 9.0 quake exactly is kind of hard to get your head around. After the Hoashi earthquake in 1995, I embarked on a small research project related to exactly this question of, what exactly does it mean to have a 6.9 earthquake, or historically a 7.9 earthquake like the 1923 earthquake in Tokyo that killed 140,000 people. I had the opportunity to go to a shake room at one point in Shizuoka where they simulated a 7.9 earthquake for me because they knew I was interested in the 1923 earthquake. Greg will really enjoy this. Risa Palm was with me, the former dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and in a nice women's business suit. She got underneath the table when that room began to shake, although we knew it was a simulation, and it nearly knocked me over. I was standing up. As I understand it, a 9.0 quake is many times the magnitude. 120 times the magnitude of a 7.9 quake, where I could barely stand. So we're talking about a massive event. We're talking about the tsunami in the reading that I've done, at least, that was in some places 13 meters high. That's 42 feet high. And say this is a 10-foot ceiling, multiply that by a little more than 4, and you get the idea of the scale of this.
There's a river valley, I can't remember which exact part, I can find it on a map, it doesn't matter, that shows the focusing power, because the tsunami went up the river valley, and the residents of that town, which were relatively unaffected by the whole event, woke up the next day to find a 3-meter inland lake everywhere. All they can do is wait for it to evaporate. Nothing they can do. They're 30 kilometers away from the coast.
I'm kind of curious because people have been telling me that almost every 15 minutes aftershocks, so how long do you know that kind of thing lasts?
Oh, the aftershocks will last at a low level for many, many months.
Many months.
Yeah, at a low level. These things like the recent magnitude 7 earthquake of a few days ago as an aftershock, there'll be probably a couple more events of that magnitude. That's relatively mild because these things are occurring far off the coast, so that's not going to affect anything.
Just the other day, that's 7.1.
Yeah, right.
6 point.
Yeah, but those
itself is such a huge.
Yeah, but those are occurring. There's a really nice visualization somewhere of all these aftershocks just turning on, and they're very localized, and they're along sort of an oval, and they're all off coast, offshore. There's no connection to any inland activity, and they're just the results of the plates relaxing in various different directions, but they're highly localized.
I just had an earthquake question. So our earthquake zone is a Cascadia subduction zone.
Right.
And, large magnitude earthquakes, is it likely to come offshore? Are we likely to have a large earthquake in the Willamette Valley?
Okay, yes. All right, so two things here. All right, so we have this large oceanic plate that's subducting underneath us. This angle, this subduction angle, determines the rate at which the plate subducts and determines the largest earthquakes that can occur. There's a relation between the largest earthquakes that can occur and the slope. We are in the most unfavorable position in that matrix. However, it's 300 years between events. Now, we are in a very seismically active zone in the northwest, but we don't know it because where this angle is so steep, that the seismic disturbances are very far beneath the ground and damp out before they get to us. An average earthquake is located 40 to 60 kilometers below us, and energy damps out by the time it gets to the surface. So we are one of the most earthquake active places in the world. It's just that the energy doesn't get to the surface, fortunately. The penalty you pay for that is that every 300 years, you get a really enormous release.
So we could have a big release in the Willamette Valley.
Absolutely. But not today.
But not. But 1700, let's
Oh
say.
yeah, we're overdue statistically.
That's right.
Right, so it could happen anytime.
After finals week.
Thank you for that precise
Students
qualification.
are hoping it's during finals week. Probably.
Yeah, right. Professor can't write the tables, JP.
The Oregon State Geology Department has been mandated legislatively to make earthquake risk geology and geography public. And the places on the coast that have been subject in the past to tsunamis are known, and the subsurface geology that can cause liquefaction is not everywhere. It's patchy, and it's known. And the state of Oregon has done an early job and a good job in mandating retrofitting of public buildings. The major driver for the move of Sacred Heart Hospital from where it was to where it is was earthquake mitigation. And the state had mandated a 30-year time frame to get it done. And it's the same way with schools. Whether we can afford that is something else again, but at least
And this will give protection for 99% of all the earthquakes. It's not the really ultimately big ones.
Somebody up there said that this Japanese one was the fourth largest on record.
Oh,
What is the largest
the largest earthquake ever?
that ever
On
recorded?
record.
If you ask 10 geologists, you get 20 different answers.
Oh.
The San Francisco earthquake may be the largest one. It was just inaccurately measured. But, you know.
The Loma Prieta,
No, the 1908 one.
1908.
So I live on the Mackenzie River, and some landscape earthquake that will someday happen, perhaps in our lifetime or not. Do we know how ocean swell and tsunamis affect our rivers? How will affect, can you guess, like the Willamette here by the U of O, inland of the Mackenzie? How do tsunamis behave on waterways?
Well, we have a coast range as a buffer, so there probably won't be much impact. The largest impact would be deformation of the lower Columbia Basin. Okay? And how far up that would go is unclear. I doubt that any mountain that originates, any river that originates in the Cascades would be disrupted by tsunami.
Anthropology thing. But I just got a letter from my friend in Sendai, and one thing I was so impressed was that her house was okay, that everything was okay. But that evening, the couple men from that same district knocked every door, which was, what the stay, and they just told them that even though you didn't lose your house, you can still come to that some school with people there, and they are giving some food to everybody. Wow. And so I was kind of impressed about that, because we do have like a Fairmont district thing that they do have, but I can't imagine anybody would come to knock every door to ask those questions.
Right, go out of their way to make sure everybody has access to the resources.
They just wanted to know everybody was okay. And so they went to school, and so that evening was everybody got the food for one round bread, and one banana, and one tangerine, and then bottled water. That's what they said. And so at least everybody got some food. Kind of interesting,
It really is. Yeah. It's been very impressive and humbling to watch, and a little disconcerting to think about if this were the United States. What would be going on?
I can imagine it happen. Yeah.
Way in the back.
So I used to live in Seaside, and being on the coast, I grew up with tsunami awareness all my life. However, nobody could actually quite tell me the minute that the tsunami warning comes out, how long would it take for say for you to get from the beach to the hills?
Oh, right now.
How fast? How long would it take for
Right
this
now,
wave
for
to
the
hit
tsunami
this?
warning metric is so sensitive now. Right now, you'd have 12 hours of warning now. If this had happened in
That's from a Japanese tsunami.
right, that's from Japanese tsunami.
If it happened
From the Oregon
over
coast,
Oregon,
it'd be less.
it's 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
It'd be enough. You have to hurry. And remind everybody that we have plenty of empirical evidence from the 1964 Alaska earthquake that generated tsunamis. That you shouldn't live in Seaside, Tillamook, or Crescent City.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not from Fukushima Prefecture, but I'm from Tohoku area. My family are okay. But I had a question about Fukushima nuclear power plant. The level of the Fukushima disaster up to 5 to 7 recently, and then it, as you said before, it is the same level of Chernobyl, and then Chernobyl. Still now we can go in like 30 kilometers.
30 kilometers, yeah.
30 kilometers. Do you think it will ever happen to Fukushima? Because I know many friends, and part of my family is there in Fukushima, and then is their hometown, and then I'm sure they really want to go back, but do you think it will happen?
Oh, well, I can tell you that the situation is extremely well monitored. Okay, so I mean, in real time, the radiation concentrations are known at many radii from the plant, and so as soon as there's some standard. As soon as the radiation level goes below some level and stays there for 2 or 3 weeks, people can move back. that's probably not likely to happen in the next month or two. I think that all indications are going to be as conservative as possible here, and probably people won't be allowed back within a 30-kilometer radius, I would guess, for 3 or 4 months.
And another question that it would be war.
Would be what?
Would it become war situation? Because I was supposed to go back this June, because my exchange program will be finished this academic year, and then, but I haven't booked my flight yet because
Right,
it's
well.
very dangerous. And then maybe I should
I'd stay here. It's nice here in the summer.
So you have, actually I really don't know what should I do. Like, where should I go back? I mean, where should I stay? And then so you have.
Well, all I can say is when it's safe, they'll let everybody know. And I don't think safety will be declared for quite some time.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have heard that the concern in the Tokyo area is that they're expecting a big one there.
Big earthquake.
Very big earthquake.
Yes.
And this earthquake with the aftershock is a possibility that might trigger.
Well, probably not. I mean, when you get down to the tectonic details of that, I mean, you see the pattern in the aftershocks, right? And so there's no indication in the aftershock pattern that anything as far away as Tokyo is at risk to be linked to this event. So.
But I think this is something where disaster mitigation, as Lisa says, is a really important aspect of these events. People have very short memories, as we found in other earthquakes, and you really need to get people thinking about mitigation early on. Should there be a massive earthquake in Tokyo, despite the fact that there are now a lot of earthquake-resistant buildings that withstood the shaking, there's still going to be a lot of people down in the port, on plazas, on elevated trains, and the outskirts of Tokyo, there isn't earthquake-resistant housing, as you probably know. There's a lot of ramshackle housing that went up, in many cases, right after the Great Kanto earthquake, put up by landlords who were basically dealing with refugees and charging them as much rent as they possibly could for a hovel. So that is a concern, I think, that people should have, and this is a time, I think, when Tokyo can take some lessons from Sendai and try to mitigate further a disastrous event in the future. Oh, sorry.
This question may be for Mark. I mean, I've seen some of the reports that, they're having to bury bodies because they can't keep up with the cremation. And with all the, 14,000 people that are lost, how, from a Buddhist standpoint, how do you handle that if you can't have the ceremonies or the rites that you need?
Yeah, so I haven't uncovered any data regarding that. And so Japanese practice. So Japanese religious culture is very syncretistic, combining elements from many different streams. Although in some ways Buddhism is the dominant religion, but certainly Buddhism is the dominant religion when it comes to funerals. So and the dominant practice is cremation. But as you point out, it may not be possible to provide cremation services for such a large number of people, especially when the infrastructure is so highly damaged. And so people will simply have to make do with what they can. In the early tribal history of Japan, it was not cremation, and they didn't have what we would call a classical graveyard. Instead, the archaeological records indicate that they had a practice of discarding bodies near in an area that was designated near the ocean. So if you look at funerary practices, especially into pre-literate times, long before Japan was a unified nation, you see that there's evolution and adaptation. So one of the things that people have noted, especially once Japan became an economic power and Westerners became interested in sort of Japanese culture and what's behind the secret of the emergence of the Japanese economy, all kinds of crazy ideas came up. But one of the things that I think that was pointed out, which is indicative of Japanese culture generally, is it's highly adaptable. And practices can change actually quite dramatically over relatively short periods of time. And for that reason, they're not particularly dogmatic about a particular set of practices. If they need to change, they'll change quickly. And very interestingly, they'll often cast it in such a way to say, this is the way it's always been done down through the centuries and millennia. But you look 100 years back and no, it was completely different. So there's a harkening back to tradition, but often that tradition is under constant change. So they'll just adapt to the circumstances most likely to do the best that they can, and there'll be some stress around it. I'll just give you one example. So Japanese sense of calendar, and I'm most familiar with religious calendar that revolves around dates of religious founders and so on and so forth. They are not very fixated about them. So celebrating the births and deaths of important religious figures, oftentimes they'll actually change the date in any given year. Why? Because you have many temples belonging to the same sect or the same group, and all of the priests want to help celebrate at all the other temples. Well, if they all celebrate on the same day, they can't do it. So they'll say, okay, the date of the passing of our founder, you do it this weekend, we'll do it the next weekend, and so on and so forth, so that everybody can adapt. Well, it would be like saying, we're going to change Rosh Hashanah, or we're going to change Christmas. We don't do that here. But in Japan, there's a sense of fluidity around dates and practices and so forth. So one of the most recent phenomena is many Japanese get married in a Christian wedding in a chapel which is located usually in a hotel. And it's the only day they're Christian. Well, why? Because look at all the bridal magazines that were imported from the West. They're all having Christian weddings, so we have to have that too. So I think adaptation can have both strengths and weaknesses, positives and negatives, but certainly it's a characteristic of Japanese culture that people have pointed out and probably will apply to funerary practices.
I don't want to cut things off, but we need to leave time for Mitsuki to set up. I wanted to just say a couple of things to put this event in a larger context. This isn't obviously the only remembrance of these events in town by any stretch of the imagination. The Japanese student organization, soon after my return from Japan on the 14th and 16th, was already holding a vigil. As many of you know, they had a table outside of the student union and collected thousands of dollars in donations from our students and from community walking by. There have been a couple of other community-centered events, I think everyone knows, since then. So this is just one of a number of different events that are kind of keeping this in our memory and making certain that we remember and we think about what's happened and what we can do to mitigate disasters in the future. So I want to thank all of our panelists for taking their time and their energy and bringing their expertise here and sharing it with us today, and the audience too for coming and sharing this with us. And I hope that everyone will stick around for this benefit concert afterwards. Again, if you're inclined to give a donation, please go over to the table. You can do it by computer, you can do it by check, you can do it by cash to Mercy Corps. So thanks very much, everybody.